Hi, I'm Cort Savage, and welcome back to Basic Sculpture. You'll remember last time we left off discussing Marcel Duchamp, Dada, ready-mades, and a number of kick-ass contemporary artists using found objects in their work as we explored content, as one of our 5 central concerns of form, material, process, craft, and content. Did you see how I just kind of did a Dada thing there, kind of? Okay, so recall this work from last time by surrealist artist Merritt Oppenheim. Object Breakfast in Fur from 1936. Let's take a look at another work by an important surrealist artist. No, this is not a Wookiee wrestling with a nudist. It's a sculpture by surrealist sculptor Dorothea Tanning. Her choice to use fabric was the opposite of the traditional boys' club of materials such as hard stone and bronze. She said, the sensuous quality of fabric, worn next to the skin, invites more of a domestic world. Here, desire and fetish, id and ego, wrestle in a swirl of beauty and beast. And that brings us to today's subject, material as material. Now, materials have been around for a long time, used as body coverings to protect from the elements, to send social cues to other people, to store, secure, and protect possessions, and to soften, insulate, and decorate living spaces and surfaces. But the role of textiles expanded greatly in 1922, here at the Bauhaus School of Design and Architecture in Weimar, Germany, with the arrival of a young art student, Annie Albers. Albers was relegated to the discipline of weaving, the only Bauhaus workshop to allow women. But that did not stop her. She questioned the limits of textiles, comparing weaving with architecture, stating weaving is the closest to architecture because it is a building up of a whole out of single elements. Her perspective began to blur the lines between art and traditional craft. In 1931, Albers was made head of the weaving workshop, which she referred to as Exercises in Material and Structure. And in 1949, she became the first textile designer ever to have a solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So let's look at how artists adopted Albers' perspective and turned weaving materials into sculpture materials. Remember pop art? One artist of that movement was Klaus Oldenburg. He used fabrics to create everyday objects as soft sculptures at monumental scale. Do you notice the clever link there back to surrealism? Drink from the fur-lined teacup, taste of the fur of the ice cream bar? Okay. Remember Fluxus? In his iconic work, Felt Suit, Fluxus artist Joseph Beuys, and remember his honey pump, created a sculpture of a working-class man's suit out of thick felt to communicate his belief that every human being is an artist and that the essential definition of a human being is that of an artist. Later, artist Annette Lemieux made a sarcastic commentary on Beuys' works, reminding us that not every human being wears a man's suit, and playfully that not only adults are by definition artists. Speaking of felt, remember Robert Morrison minimalism? No, wait, I haven't talked about that yet. Minimalism, an art movement focused on exposing the essence or identity of a subject through eliminating all non-essential features. Minimalist Robert Morris used industrial felt to explore issues of indeterminacy by cutting felt and leaving the final configuration of the form to be determined by the material itself, relinquishing artistic control to chance and gravity. Felt has anatomical associations, Morris said. It relates to the body. It's skin-like. Sounds like he was talking to Dorothea Tanning. Beginning in 1958, Christo wrapped forms to explore the magical and transformative effect fabrics have when wrapped around familiar objects. Christo said, "Fabric is inviting and sensual," adding, "My sculptures move with the wind. They breathe." His sculptures ask us, what does it mean when we conceal something? And what does it mean when we reveal it? From Christo's modest beginnings, it led here. Most of us are familiar with these projects completed by he and his partner Jean-Claude, where entire buildings and environments get wrapped. Eva Hesse's Expanded Expansion is a sculptural embodiment of opposites united. Both permanence and deterioration operate in the piece. Fiberglass poles, rigid, durable entities, are juxtaposed with fragile, rubber-covered cheesecloth. Like an accordion or curtain, it can be compressed or extended. Its repetitive units echo the seriality of minimalism, but now with a new set of concerns referenced as process art emerge. But we'll save that for a different conversation. Meanwhile, in 1960s Soviet Union, most sculptures looked like this: state-sponsored propaganda statuary glorifying the proletariat worker. But in a small apartment in East Berlin, a young Polish artist was going to shipyards, collecting scrap rope, unraveling it, dyeing it, and reweaving it into these. Magdalena Abakanowicz's Abakans totally alter textiles by turning them into sculpture. Or this work, Embryology, that includes 800 hand-sewn forms to create an environment intersecting essential minimalist form with intimate human touch. They are as much piles of human figures as they are piles of potatoes. Then, she pressed burlap into plaster forms to create repetitions of human forms, turning them into tribes, often identical in their shell-like form, but each entirely unique in its rippling surface. You might recognize her work on Davidson's campus. This work, titled The Group of 10. Before Abakanowicz, weaving was for cloth. After her, weaving became an act of sculpting. In England, Anthony Gormley asked a simple question: where do I end and the rest of the world begin? His answer was his clothes. So he created this work, Room, in which he took his clothes that he was wearing, ripped them into strands, and created the new form of a cage. If you look closely, you can see his shoes on the floor inside. Back in the U.S., David Hammond's African-American flag was created in 1990 for an exhibition to awaken viewers to the lack of attention the art world gives to African-American artists. It became one of Hammond's most iconic works. It was a combination of the flag of the United States in the colors of the Pan-African flag adopted by the Universal Negro Improvement Association in 1920. Hammond's flag has become since a symbolic motif for a people, a shared history, and a socio-political viewpoint. Intersecting costuming traditions with contemporary sculpture and dance, Nick Cave began making works like these, referenced as sound suits. These wearable sculptures are shown in galleries and museums, but are also used in dance performances, festivals, and other venues to bring people together in celebration and wonder. Perhaps the world's largest community arts project ever created, though, was the Names Project AIDS quilt that was started by Cleve Jones in the early 1990s. It now has over 48,000 3 by 6 foot panels honoring the lives of those who died from the AIDS epidemic. And around that time in New York City, there was this other guy. This is my conceptual combination of a mailbox, a suitcase, a saddle, and drapery with internal mechanics that made the sculpture rock silently back and forth. It was inspired by the Gertrude Stein novel, The Making of the Americans. Tracy Emmons, known for her unflinchingly honest autobiographical works, created Everyone I Ever Slept With, 1963 to 1995, by hand-sewing appliques on the interior and exterior of a camping tent. The references include all her sexual partners, plus relatives she slept with as a child, her twin brother, and her 2 aborted children. Anne Hamilton created these motorized whirling fabric chambers viewers can enter. Her sculptures push the spectator to redefine the body and the spaces in which it evolves. She created situations of discomfort and awkwardness in which the movements of the actors are embarrassing, entangled, repetitive, and interrupted. French artist Annette Messager uses unorthodox materials to form evocative sculptures that often challenge societal roles assigned to women and the nature of identity. She explains, "I like things made with scraps, fragments, leftovers, remnants, and things set aside. In this work, she uses gloves and colored pencils to form an enormous skull." For her Seams series, Jean Shin took a shirt or a dress and cut away the fabric to leave behind a continuous linear band around the stitches. The remaining seam structures create an abstract drawing in space while referencing the body's skeletal structure, proportion, gravity, and gesture. English-Nigerian artist Yinka Shonibare questions the nature of the construction of stereotypes and African identity and explores the contradiction, or what he calls the lovely irony, that the fabric most associated with African identity are actually patterns designed in England, printed using a Javanese method, manufactured in the Netherlands, and finally exported to Africa. West African artist Ellen Atsui creates shimmering patchwork tapestries of recycled metal bottle caps and discarded tins that reference both traditional African art and the history of contact between African and European cultures. After traveling between apartments in Seoul, Korea, and New York City, Doho Soo recreated both apartments by sewing replicas out of sheer polyester. This sculpture installation explores concepts of home, belonging, loss, and reflection on contained spaces. This self-trained artist, Judith Scott, born deaf, mute, and with Down syndrome, creates works with cast-off string and found materials, resulting in sculptures of intense color, curiosity, and incredible intricacy. Or here, filling lycra skins with fragrant spices such as clove and turmeric, Brazilian artist Ernesto Neto invites viewers to walk within his work, touching, smelling, and experiencing his sculpture through all their senses. Pia Camille sews together hundreds of t-shirts to create sculptures that reflect on tarpaulins and social interactions of the public markets of her native Mexico City. And Japanese artist Eiko Hashisuka makes forms from fabrics, both custom silkscreen printed, combined with found clothing, creating these highly individualized works that reference both abstract expressionist art as well as allusions to human forms. And finally, North Carolina-born sculptor and social practice artist Ramikhan Orwisters uses traditional rug braiding and shards of found objects in what he calls mending relationships and brings communities together into social groups called crochet jams. So, what did we learn? We learned about how Bauhaus professor Annie Albers questioned the limits of textiles in art. Then we learned about how Magdalena Abakanowicz turned weaving fabric into creating sculpture. And then we were introduced to a number of contemporary artists who use fabrics and textiles in their sculpture today. Next time, we'll take a closer look at how materials range from traditional to experimental and intersect with ideas of time, permanence, and ephemerality. I'll leave you with this question. What makes anyone think an inflatable tube dude can convince you to buy a new Audi? We'll dive into these and other topics next time in Basic Sculpture.